Assalamu alaikum, Mehvish. How are you?
Walaikum assalam, Shahir, all well. How are you?
I'm good, Alhamdulillah. You can start the presentation.
Okay, Ji. Okay. Um, Shahir, any idea how many people do we have right now with us?
We have, let me check. People are still joining.
Okay.
Yes.
So, do you think we should wait for 5 minutes and then start?
As you are comfortable, no issue. You may start now. Because लोग आ गए हैं काफी.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And my name is Mehvish. I have about 2 decades of financial sector experience, and a big part of that experience was spent funding infrastructure projects, learning about them initially in my younger years, and then funding them for most of my professional life. About 5 years ago, I pivoted out of financing of the banking sector, and I went into a development finance company called Intrazamin as their chief investment officer. And one of the purposes was to provide guarantees to help infrastructure projects grow and make those projects that banks usually don't fund. They make them more bankable. So that is one of the solutions that is also written in my presentation. And a little later, I also pivoted into fashion retail, manufacturing, as well as selling. In that, I joined as the chief operating officer of Al Karam Studio, and later on graduated to becoming their CEO. And currently, I am with an upcoming private equity fund, and we're in a capital raise mode, and inshallah the fund will go on to support a lot of upcoming companies in Pakistan and very promising sectors in Pakistan. So off with the topic of the day. I'm sorry, I just realized after uploading my presentation that the title doesn't look visible. So wherever it's not visible, I'll read it out. The topic of today's discussion presentation is innovative financing models for infrastructure growth. Now, three of those models I'm going to be discussing today: PPP, guarantees, and capital markets. So, first of all, let's understand what infrastructure is all about. And I think it's no secret, infrastructure is the heart and soul of any country's economic growth. And in order for social inclusion to happen or environmental sustainability, growth is a must, and it can take shape. It can take many shapes. It can come through roads, energy, water, health, education, and even in today's economy, digital connectivity. It creates jobs, it creates opportunities, it makes life more efficient. So, infrastructure is very, very critical to the bread and butter of any country. Globally, about 400 to $500 per capita is spent on infrastructure. But more specifically, now if you move down the order, OECD countries tend to spend about $1,500 to $4,000 per capita, and you can also see it when you go to these countries. You can see it how well developed their infrastructure is. It is because that's how much they spend. Um, China spends about 1,000 to 1,500 USD per capita. Our neighbor India has been spending $200 to $300 per capita. Now, here's where I would like to involve my audience, and Shahir, if you could facilitate. My question to the audience is: any idea how much, without please Googling, any idea how much Pakistan would be spending uh, in, per capita in infrastructure? Shahir, I can't see the responses, so you'll need to facilitate.
If there's anyone who would like to respond to Mehvish, please unmute yourself, or you can also use the chat box. Is there anyone willing?
Any idea, any guesses? Just put it down in the chat box, and then I can continue and I can reveal our number. Any luck, Shahir?
I don't think they are willing to
All
respond.
right. So it's a very sad number. Pakistan spends about 30 to $40 per capita on infrastructure, and well, as you can see, it is a fraction of what global infrastructure average per capita spend is. And so, with that, it's no secret that Pakistan's infrastructure capital spending is critically low, and both in absolute terms and relative to our needs, our growing population and our urbanization. And Pakistan also faces the added risk of vulnerability to climate change. And as per Notre Dame's Global Adaptation Index, Pakistan ranks very high in vulnerability and very low in its readiness to adapt to climate change. And it's the eighth most affected country to climate change. Similarly, COVID has also made the importance of connectivity, remote working, always be ready mode for all of us. And also, it has highlighted how logistics is so very important. So, post COVID, these two sectors have also become very important: digital infrastructure as well as logistics modernization. So, for Pakistan context in particular, these two sectors have now become very relevant. More recently, in the last 2 years, power tariffs have been hiked by about 150%. And in the wake of that, two more sectors have become very, very relevant. We are one of the most rapidly solarizing nations on the face of this earth, and renewable energy and energy transition have become very, very relevant to our country in the recent times. Given all of this, government resources, it's very obvious, IMF and all, it's not a secret, Pakistan government does not have the kind of funding that is needed to, facilitate infrastructure growth on its own. So there comes a bunch of models that help, create more visibility of private capital into the system to grow infrastructure. So amongst
Yes,
that,
one of the explain.
sorry, sorry,
Continue करें आप continue.
PPPs in blended finance, guarantees, and capital markets, all of these models with the purpose of leveraging public funds and catalyzing private investment, de risking various stages of infrastructure, as well as making the projects commercially viable and impactful. Moving on to the first model, public private partnerships. What are public private partnerships? Well, they are partner, as the name indicates, it's a partnership, contractual partnership between government. It could be, federal government, it could be provincial government, it could be municipal government as well, and private sector. Now, it typically involves three stakeholders: public sector, that is any government. Then, secondly, a contractor, that would be the party that would be carrying out the project or executing the project. So, that contractor would participate through equity. And the third party would be the private sector financiers, right? So private sector may you will have two participants. One would be the equity participant, and the second one would be the debt participant. Now, The model typically revolves around the private sector parties giving capital and the public sector de-risking certain aspects of the project. Now, that aspect typically is offtake risk, right? And that is circumvented through annuities or viability gap funding. Viability gap funding is more like an upfront funding. Annuities is an ongoing affair, and it pretty much takes care of offtake risk. So it incentivizes the private sector parties to come in and invest money and execute the project. Now you may ask that if the offtake risk is taken care of, तो फायदा क्या हुआ? मतलब काम क्या किया आपने? Project risk क्या लिया? Project risk ये लिया that with the involvement of private sector, now what is the government gaining? The government is gaining transparency. The government is gaining an efficiency. The government is getting the project executed at a much lower cost because private sector is more efficient, it is more transparent, and its practices are more commercial oriented rather than gain oriented. So where commercial gains are concerned, automatically you bring in more efficiencies. Typical sectors that benefit from these kind of setups are transport sectors. आपने सबसे ज़्यादा examples transport sector की हमारे पास है. Energy, water, healthcare, education, urban infrastructure, and in some cases even jails have been funded through PPPs. Okay, so why do they matter for Pakistan? Well, government doesn't have the money, so you do need to bring in private capital. So it bridges the gaps without burdening public budgets, and it improves delivery. As I said, private sector is more efficient and it's more transparent. It mobilizes long-term private finance. Now, the long-term key emphasis you will see wherever these tools that I will be highlighting टर्म की बात होगी. टर्म की बात क्यों होती है? प्रोजेक्ट फाइनेंसिंग, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर फाइनेंसिंग typically involves construction and typically involves long gestation period for which you need to accommodate in the tenor of lending or even the paybacks. So to accommodate that tenor, you do require some kind of a wrap support, and PPP may public side of the line kind of provides for that. So, critical success factors for these models to work out: strong legal framework is involved, what each stakeholder is supposed to do, what will be their contribution, what will be their role, very clearly laid out, as well as a fair risk allocation. Obviously, if one of the parties is taking on more burden than the other, the project, there are very high chances that that party may default because you have overloaded that party to take on more risks than others. Pipeline of bankable projects is a must. If the funding is ready and if you don't have bankable, bank ready projects, then two these things come hit snags. And a transparent procurement process. Actually, transparent procurement process, I feel, will be a result of involving private sector automatically. Okay, so a couple of examples. I'll quickly breeze through them. London Crossrail, where it was a huge, huge project. It was 19 billion pounds, and a lot of banks participated in that, and risk sharing happened. Uh, the UK government provided guarantees, and it involved the construction, rolling stock, and system integration under various risk sharing systems. Similarly, for Pakistan, government of Sindh is very, very active in PPPs. In fact, most of the examples that you will find in Pakistan archives would be that of government of Sindh. Ironically, I have put in here a Punjab project, but that's one of the few projects that has happened under PPP setups. And roads are typically easiest ones to do simply because government basically gives you a wrap guarantee or annuity, gives you an annuity structure. उनके पास liquidity होती है. So annuities basically take care of your off-take risk. Annuity in terms of toll collection. So to cover up for any shortfall in toll collection, government typically gives you an annuity guarantee. And so this project was off taken by, as I said, that there's always a private party that takes on equity. So FWO was that equity side of the life. And it was funded by local banks under the annuity guarantee structure. And it was very successfully executed. And you have seen the ring road, you have seen the southern loop, and it exists now. and many other such roads I can name that have successfully been executed based on this model. QA Solar Park. A lot of you may have heard of QA Solar. It was the first solar park in Pakistan, and it was initially entirely funded by the government, and then later on the portions, they were executed in a power purchase. Again, here you see offtake risk guarantee, capacity guarantee by government, and in a PPP mode, banks were given capacity payment guarantee where their repayments were guaranteed. And now it's become a very controversial subject. Will not dive into it, but day in and day out, you hear why government gave capacity guarantees beyond its fiscal capacity. Okay, so that brings us to the next tool of promoting infrastructure, which is guarantees. What are guarantees? They are obviously a risk mitigation tool, and what are they supposed to do? They can be either given by governments or they can be given by DFIs. They are meant to enhance your credit worthiness. They help reduce investor risk, crowd, they help bring in private capital. They also lower financing costs simply because when it's a government backed project or a guarantee backed project. Sorry, just 1 second. Give me a second. So when it's a government backed project or a guarantee backed project, um, the guarantees are typically AAA in credit rating, which means the credit risk is significantly lower. So the financing costs also become lower. They don't directly fund a project, these guarantees, but they make the project more bankable in case of being funded by financial sector or banks, and more investable if it's going in a capital market mode. What is it that they do for infrastructure? Well, number one, tenors. They elongate the tenors. They can go for as long as 15 to 30 years. If the capital, typically आपकी project finance की capital costs are very high, upfront capital costs, so that's something they support. They bring in a lot of private capital. um, Complex regulatory environments, complex regulations. Also, they provide a work around that because it becomes a little more feasible for financial institutions to participate in it. And they also provide solutions to currency risks or demand risks. Um, Obviously, they get better financing terms. Banks will give you better terms if you have a guarantee wrap. Bonds gain investor confidence. Sponsors find it easier to have a financial close, and governments. It also helps government ease out their burden in terms of assuming full liabilities. What are the different types of guarantees? Sovereign guarantees की हम बात कर चुके हैं. Partial risk guarantees. So basically, if you have $100 loan and you have a 40% partial risk guarantee, what that does is that it is covering your loan. It is basically covering your principal payment up to $40. So that's how partial risk guarantees work. Typically, providers are World Bank, ADB, NIGA. Similarly, partial credit guarantees also work in a very similar fashion, and the additional provider of such guarantees is also Guarantor, a specialized company that I have worked a lot with in the past. First loss guarantee. So first loss guarantees, typically the way they work is they guard the investors or the financiers against the first default. So, and in the first few years of a loan's life, or an instrument's life, or a project's life, they are the most critical ones and they are the riskiest ones. So, if those few years are covered, the first loss guarantee takes care of a lot of those risks and makes it easier for investors to come in and fund projects. And so it's a blended finance technique. Blended financing is also something, one of the techniques to fund infrastructure projects. It combines philanthropic funds with commercial funds to make the project more viable, or it helps commercial funding go into more riskier sectors and more riskier geographies. Um, Liquidity guarantees typically take care of liquidity risk. So a project may be financially feasible, but it would typically go through spells where its liquidity in certain times may not be enough. However, debt repayments or bond repayments are mandatory. So liquidity guarantees basically take care of those times where liquidity is tight and the project needs that cash flow funding. Okay, some of the examples. So there is a company called InfraCredit in Nigeria that gives local currency guarantees in Nigerian currency called Naira, and it was a groundbreaking effort in the sense that this company has helped mobilize pension funds to invest into long-term infrastructure bonds. And earlier, these funds would only, um, you know, issue instruments or invest in instruments that were backed by government guarantees. So this was a hugely successful initiative, InfraCredit. And the kind of projects they have so far funded fall in renewable energy, housing, as well as transportation sector. For Pakistan, particularly, there are three projects, and there are many, many projects actually. The list goes on and on. For sovereign guarantee, आपके लिए मैं यहाँ पर चार examples quote करूँगी. बलोकी, भिक्की, Haveli Bahadur Shah, and Sindh Agro Coal Mining Company. Why do I quote these examples? These projects were huge. They were unprecedentedly huge. Some of them were LNG based projects, and SCCMC was Pakistan's first coal mining project. And इनकी sheer size इतनी बड़ी थी that it required not only banking sector की involvement, पूरे entire banking sector की, it also required funding to come from China. It also required, so banks also go have these regulatory constraints in terms of how much they can lend to a particular project. So the government guarantee played a dual role here. Not only did they give us, protect the financial institutions from various risks, they also, the government guarantee allowed banks to lend beyond the constraints of their single party lending limitations that are imposed by the central bank. Okay, what do we have next? So we have another company which is a twin of InfraCredit, InfraZamin. This company exists in Pakistan. It's one of my previous employers as well. Now, this company also provides partial and full credit risk guarantees. And the transaction in question that I have put in here is a partial credit guarantee of 11.5 years. This loan facility, loan wrap, was given for a distributed solar project. And it turned out to be the longest tenor local currency solar financing in the banking history. Okay. The last tool that I will be discussing today is capital markets. What are capital markets? Well, you guys have all seen Pakistan Stock Exchange, but that is the equity side of capital markets. The other side of capital markets that I'm talking about is the debt side, and which is fairly passive in Pakistan. Most of the capital market deals that happen in Pakistan are backed by government. So, बड़ा crowding out हुई भी है of government. It features crowding out of private institutions by the government. So it's heavily government borrowed, and most of the instruments are PIBs or government guaranteed instruments. So that's no fun, and that's not a capital market. But well, the way it exists in Pakistan, it's like that. Capital markets typically what they do, they provide long-term, scalable, diversified funding. Now you may ask, what does diversified funding mean here? Diversification की जब हम बात करते हैं, it means diversification away from banks. Banks are typically considered the largest capital providers for infrastructure projects. However, if you bring into context insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, these are the three pools of funding which are, if they are put into practice, because they by the nature are also long term funds. Okay, you don't need to access your pension funds until 15-20 years, whoever is investing into pension funds. Same is the case for insurance funds. These are pools of capital that are available. However, जो उनका सबसे बड़ा risk है is the loss of capital, loss of principal. They cannot put money in projects, high risk projects, and lose money, lose principal. So, capital markets also need certain kind of tools and support so that they can participate and become the right candidates for infrastructure projects. Now, and also they need to invest in certain bonds. Okay, so they cannot just put money directly into the projects, they do it through instruments. And those instruments can take the form of infrastructure bonds, green bonds, muni bonds, infrastructure investment trusts, and project securitization. There are many more. Gender bonds भी exist करते हैं, climate bonds हैं. Capital markets are well important because they mobilize institutional investors. I just spoke about them: pension funds, insurances, um, as well as they bring in liquidity as well as transparency because these bonds are tradable, so it can change hands. It can bring in new investors who can then, through secondary market, start participating in such initiatives. They help lower cost of capital. Why? Because of the guarantee wrap. Again, if typically such bonds have partial or full credit risk guarantees, and they also enable the issuers, the bond issuers, to recycle their assets since their capital gets released through raising these funds. Global example, again, our friend InfraCredit Nigeria. I have put in their first bond, which was given to which was issued to Transport Services Limited. It was for 12 billion naira. It was a 10-year Series 1 bond, and with a same 100% credit guarantee wrap. It was the first corporate infrastructure bond. It was rated triple A by the local credit rating agency, and it was oversubscribed. Now, see this particular line where it was oversubscribed by 18 institutional investors because it was rated AAA. And even the, I think the spread was also not very high. But the reason that it had taken away, de-risked the bond so much that the instrument had a lot of interest from institutional investors. And 11 domestic pension funds also participated in it. The strategic significance of something like this was obviously, opening up of a new market to infrastructure, and infrastructure funding got enabled through previously unattainable sources, which were pension funds and insurers. So it was a first for this market. पाकिस्तान में क्या हो रहा है जी? पाकिस्तान में सबसे एक द मोस्ट यूजुअल सस्पेक्ट इज एनर्जी सेक्टर सुकूक्स. आपने जो सर्कुलर डेट के बारे में सुना होगा. सो पाकिस्तान एनर्जी सुकूक 1 and 2 were done by mutual fund AMC sector of Pakistan. So this was the first time these bonds were issued to financial sector से बाहर, to AMCs. Otherwise, banks would be funding all circular debt. What this did for the government was it gave them longer tenure. So this bond extended the tenure from 5 to 10 years, and it was it was a liquidity tool for the government. It was not for infrastructure funding, and you all know, or most of you should know, what circular debt is all about. So it was used to fund circular debt. The second bit is the DFI bit. I am specifically going to talk about infrazamin led guarantee, and the guarantee in question that I would talk about is its gender bond, which was issued under 100% infrazamin credit guarantee wrap, and it was issued for Kashaf Foundation. Kashaf Foundation, as some of you may know, it works for female led borrowers. So, what did this bond do? This bond basically did two, three things. It helped. One of the objectives was to help in the construction or expansion of rural schools. Second was flood rehabilitation of all these women's houses, and the third one was working capital and growth loans for women-led micro enterprises. So yeah, so that was the private sector initiative in capital markets. What are the key challenges? I have already talked about it. I'll just go through it quickly for your benefit. Pakistan has a very, very shallow secondary market. Secondary market से मुराद है trading. So debt instruments की trading nearly आप when you even go to the the website PSX की तो आप देखेंगे उसमें आपको उसकी trading की number of trades ही नहीं दिखेंगी. So they are very shallowly the market is very shallow. Secondary market traders are not present, unlike the equity side of Pakistan stock market. Limited investor base debt is obviously more complicated, although ironically, equity should be considered more risky and more complicated, but debt is always considered more complicated by the general public. So, pension and insurance sectors also lacking the understanding. Pension funds आपके are not extensively invested into Pakistan debt market. Or if you even open up pension funds, आपके मेरे pension जो the ones that I have invested in, they all invest in PIBs and T-bills. That's it. It's just one straightforward investment. Lack of any infrastructure bonds, obviously. So it's a circular reference here. The market being shallow or lack of offerings. So offerings will only come if there is more receptiveness in the market, and market says that the number of issuances is less. So which way it's a bit of a circular thing. uh, no active municipal bond market. Actually, municipalities are not considered creditworthy borrowers in Pakistan, and a very high reliance. So here commercial banks पे बहुत बड़ी reliance है. They have a lot of liquidity, so natural, and public development programs पर भी बहुत high reliance है. So because of this, capital market has not been able to come through and invest more in infrastructure. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. If you guys have any questions, I'll let Shahir take the stage now. But you see a little QR code here. So if in case we run out of time today, you guys scan this. It will take you to my LinkedIn page. You can inbox me your questions. If you have any curiosities, I'm happy to answer to the best of my abilities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mehvish, for your time and for such a valuable presentation. I have some questions written for you. कि audience को भी help out करे understand कि क्या है ये सारा infrastructure and what is public-private partnerships and what is the infrastructure. So I have 4 to 5 questions for you. Then we can wrap up the presentation. The first question is, what role do you believe private equity and institutional investors can play in transforming infrastructure investment in Pakistan?
What role can, sorry?
What role do you believe private equity and institutional investors can play in transforming infrastructure investment in Pakistan?
देखिए प्राइवेट इक्विटी ऑब्वियसली प्राइवेट इक्विटी कैन play a huge role. Why? Because private equity typically looks for high growth projects, right? And when and they so their risk taking ability is typically higher than an average investor, which means that if that infrastructure project is able to promise certain returns in certain number of years, so long as there is an exit possibility, so markets need to be deepened, or future buyers need to exist in the market for institutional investors to come through. Private equity पाकिस्तान में बहुत कम हुई है, but जो हुई है वो infrastructure में हुई है. And there are examples of investments being made in wind IPPs through private equity. So that exists. Now you also asked me about institutional investors. Institutional investors also need to be a little more proactive. उनके पास teams created होनी चाहिए. Their manpower needs to be more educated to help the system understand when an instrument comes to them, how to analyze the risks and how to make things simpler for their institutions to invest in. इनके पास बहुत liquidity है. They
Mm,
have a lot of funds under management, and
mm,
I feel that it is a responsibility on part of institutional investors to create those kind of systems, and they can learn from the banks to create those kind of systems and those kind of manpower that support
Hmm.
understanding of such projects and the instruments that are used to raise that funding.
Hmm. All right, perfect. So the next question is, you had an exceptional journey across top financial institutions. What motivated your recent pivot to join InfraZamin and focus on development finance?
So, Infrazamin is not so recent anymore, Shahid. I went to Infrazamin 5 years ago, and then I
Hmm.
exited also, and then I went to fashion retail. So, I'm somebody who wants to keep growing, and I want to keep doing new things in life, and somewhere, anywhere where I can make an impact, where I can make a difference, my efforts turn around that institution is where I would like to be. And Infrazamin was first of its kind. It won the objectives were very noble, impact driven institution tha. They wanted to help grow infrastructure. So, that was my motivation to join Infrazamin. And again, even Alkaram, the story was very similar. It was a company that had missed its growth story during post-COVID years, while other retail players grew very fast. So it had missed out on that growth spell, and that's the growth spell it experienced while I was there, leading the growth initiative for Alkaram as well.
Hmm. How can the guarantee instruments like those provided by InfraZamin reduce risk and unlock capital otherwise under underserved sectors?
So, as I explained in my presentation, also Shahir, what um, DFI guarantees typically do is they de-risk certain aspects of a project. Okay, how do they do it? They basically they say that if there is ever a payment default, okay, it
Hmm.
can take various forms. Let me just quickly go back to my table also while I'm explaining this. If you look at this table, ठीक है, there are different types of guarantees लिखी हुई. Partial risk
Hmm.
guarantee, partial credit guarantee. I want you to have a look
Hmm.
at this, and the second last one, which is first loss guarantee. So infrazamin would fall somewhere here in number 3 and number 4. ठीक है. What they
Hmm.
do is, if it's 100 billion rupees का bond and उसमें से infrazamin ने 50% guarantee कर दिया, तो if there is a 5 billion rupee का default, so 2.5 billion gets covered through Infrasound. And they will
Okay.
inject funds, they will make that payment, they will make the banks good for that default to the extent of 50%. So if it's a 50% thing, the credit guarantee, the credit rating company looks at the bond or that loan facility, and uski credit rating, uski inherent risk से बहुत रिस्क जो है आधा हो गया, अब आपका 50% हो गया, तो वो क्रेडिट गारंटी ऑटोमेटिकली इन्हांस हो जाती है. So that makes that instrument or loan much more attractive to the financier compared to its original form where it was 100% risk. और ये रिस्क ऐसा नहीं कि पार्टी ऑन हो रही है, ये रिस्क इसलिए अज्यूम किया जाता है बाय क्रेडिट गारंटी कंपनीज कि अगर सेक्टर अनफेमिलियर है, फॉर इंस्टेंस, अगर आपका जो है बोरोवर वो अनबैंकेबल था पहले, उसके पास बैंकों का एक्सेस नहीं था, वो डोर ओपनर के तौर पे सर्व करती है गारंटी. The next time when that so the with the idea being that the next time that company borrows, either it needs very little of infrazamin guarantee, or it needs zero guarantee cover for its next borrowing spell. So the idea is to introduce them to the formal financing sector and make their access easier and make them more bankable, more investable.
Okay. The final question I have for you is, what are the gaps in the local debt capital market ecosystem that need urgent attention, and how can the players like InfraZamin help fill them?
Gaps मैंने आपको यही बताया, there are no debt instruments that are private sector debt instruments, corporate sector. आपको या तो फाइनेंशियल
Hmm.
सेक्टर के डेट इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स दिखेंगे, बैंक्स के टीयर 2 कैपिटल, और आपको गवर्नमेंट के पीआईबीज दिखेंगे, गवर्नमेंट गारंटी लोन्स दिखेंगे. तो कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर जो है वो डज नॉट यूज कैपिटल मार्केट्स, or they don't consider capital markets as a swift source of funds. And that needs to change, and that will only change if the regulations are also a little more. Khair, regulations also are now, I feel, unme flexibility aa gayi hai, but the willingness and readiness of um, you know mutual funds and pension funds and insurance companies needs to be a bit more for that funding to be mobilized. The will has to be there, and obviously
Okay.
systems जब होंगे तो willingness खुद ही आसान हो जाती है.
Hmm. Okay. So before wrapping up, I would like you to give some advice to the entrepreneurs, audience को, innovators को. तो उस चीज़ के दो एक क्वेश्चंस है मेरे पास जो ऑडियंस को थोड़ा मोटिवेट करेगा, जिसके बारे में कर सकते हैं. What
मुझे
mindset
जी जी, सॉरी, प्लीज प्लीज गो अहेड.
what mindset shift do you think the younger generation of founders and investors need to bring onto infrastructure and impact finance?
um, देखिए, I think that today's generation is doing so many things that my generation really shied away from doing. So, एक तो
Hmm.
kudos to everybody in this generation. All these startup founders, you guys are doing things that very few of us used to do in our times, and now we see
Okay.
more and more of you doing it. So, एक तो ये कि I think the one thing that our generation can give to your generation is that consistency. कि काम
Hmm.
आपने अपनी नई स्टार्टअप स्टार्ट तो की, बट एंड ऑब्वियसली यू गोइंग टू फेस impediments. So
Agree.
consistency and structure in your work life, I think those would be critical. Other than that, I think you guys have a lot of faith in your own abilities. You guys are
Hmm.
very entrepreneurial. You're very creative, and you are trying to solve for a lot of problems through your startups. So very well done over there. I just feel that our generation worked with a lot of consistency and a lot of structure in our professional lives that helped us. अच्छा आगे, even the world is evolving so fast, and it's so transient in nature now, and there's so much uncertainty. So थोड़ी
Hmm.
resilience is also थोड़ी नहीं, बहुत सारी resilience is required. um, and be flexible कि okay, आज इस तरह से काम करना है तो कल उस तरीके से. This is what
Hmm.
our financiers need to see. So be flexible for that, and I have no doubts that you guys will be able to do really well in your careers.
Perfect. If someone is liking to enter in this space today, what skills or exposure should they seek to be relevant in the development finance or private-public partnership advisory?
So, public-private partnership advisory is a big thing to jump into. So, the idea always is to first see how these transactions have been done, how they are
Hmm.
executed, and also your read of legal documents. Up to khair, AI has made everything a lot easier. So yeah, use that AI to as a tool very wisely for yourself.
Hmm.
I think reading and understanding of legal agreements and capital structures, legal structures, as well as financial models, I think is very critical for you guys. So self-train. I don't think कि आपको कोई इतने लंबे लंबे stints at financial institutions लगाने की
Hmm.
ज़रूरत है. Case studies थोड़ी सी देख लें. I think those would help. And
Hmm.
Pakistan's market is so underdeveloped right now that anything that any good steps from you guys will only help. It's like a drop in the ocean. There's a lot that needs to be done. आप लोगों ने शुरू में अगर मेरी किसी ने slide देखी हो तो Pakistan's spending on infrastructure is dismally low compared to even the global average. हम 10% भी नहीं हैं. हम 30 to 40 dollars
Hmm.
लगाते हैं, और global infrastructure benchmark, which is also not considered a benchmark, is 430
Hmm.
to $500 per capita. So यही आप देख लें कि opportunity बहुत बड़ी है. So don't doubt yourself, but do prepare well for it. But you don't need long stints in financial institutions. You can jump into it, there is a lot of need for talent as well as capital in
Mm.
this space.
And what about for the early growth phase startups in the infrastructure? What financing pathways should they explore beyond traditional loans?
I think early stage support is very different from commercial
Mm.
because project commercially viable होने से पहले जब early stages से गुजर रहा होता है, that's where you need blended financing. ठीक है?
Mm.
That's where you need angel investment.
Mm.
That's where you need a lot of developmental funding because that's considered a project development stage. It's not even conceived properly as a project, so it's not commercially viable. So wo funding sources are very different from the ones that I have described here. What I have described here are for more mature projects. So uski bhi funding exist karti hai, bahut sari exist karti hai. There are infrastructure funds and then there are a lot of development funds. And ye typically
Mm.
aapko ADB loves to do this kind of work. IFC also वर्ल्ड बैंक से इसमें बहुत सारी सपोर्ट मिलती है, पाकिस्तान को भी मिलती है।
Mm.
आपके
Okay.
प्रोविंसेस को बहुत सारी सपोर्ट मिलती है इसमें टू डेवलप सच प्रोजेक्ट्स, टू डू सच स्टडीज। ठीक है, सो ये आप लोगों का तो बहुत बड़ा रोल हो सकता है। आप लोग ऐसी रिसर्चेस एंड स्टडीज को करके प्रोजेक्ट
Exactly. Mm.
रेडीनेस स्टेज पे लेके एंड देन दैट प्रोजेक्ट कैन देन बी टेकन फॉर कमर्शियल फंडिंग।
Okay. Let's wrap this up, Mahesh. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you soon at nice facility. And wish you the best.
थैंक यू शहीर, थैंक यू। ऑलराइट।
Thank you. Mahesh.